Chapter 33. Houses, Kids, Cars, and Fast Food. Couples had put off having children during the war years, and now they were making up for that. We were having a baby boom. The war veterans had gone to college under the GI Bill of Rights, and the government paid for their tuition. By the 50s, most of those veterans were out of school, married, and having children. Their college degrees helped them find good jobs, usually better jobs than their fathers had ever had. Most women, at least middle class women, didn't work. Those new families needed places to live, and in America, every family dreamed of a home of its own, but there was a big housing shortage. What to do? Use some American ingenuity. William Levitt had it. Before the war, an average builder might build two or three or at most five houses a year, but Bill Levitt was soon finishing 36 houses a day, which added up to be 180 in every 5-day week. How did he do it? By analyzing the building process, dividing it into 27 steps, and putting teams of people to work on each step. It was Henry Ford's mass production idea applied to housing. A team did the same task over and over, moving from house to house. There were framers and roofers, tilemen and floormen, painters who did all the white painting, and others who painted all the green. Levitt began producing his own nails and making his own cement. He even bought timberland in Oregon and cut his own lumber. By doing all that, he kept his house prices very low. He had thought all of this out while he was in the Navy with the Seabees, the Navy's builders. Levitt was commissioned to build airfields practically overnight. Lives depended on his speed. He analyzed, planned, brainstormed with other Seabees, and he built the airfields. Later, he said the Navy gave him a chance to experiment and learn how to get things done. Levitt knew that a lot of veterans like himself would be looking for homes after the war, so he bought a huge tract of land on Long Island near New York City. It was mainly potato fields. Those fields soon became a community called Levyton. Most of Levitt's houses had 4.5 rooms and were exactly alike. They were sturdy, available, and a great value, like Ford's Model T when the first advertisement for the first Levyton ran in the New York Times. People began lining up. In one day alone, Levitt sold more than 1,400 houses. Bill Levitt's ideas were soon copied by other builders. The communities they built were part of something that was about to boom: suburbia. Suburbs on the outskirts of the cities were springing up around the country. Some had low cost houses, but others were affluent. As people moved out of the cities, new people, often poor people, moved in. Cities began losing some of their most productive taxpayers just when they needed rebuilding. In the new suburbs, where there was no mass transportation, something became essential: a car or two. Well, General Motors and the other auto companies saw to that. Detroit, the home of the auto industry, began building fancy cars. They were a status symbol with shiny chrome trim, shark tail like fins. The advertising industry geared up to convince consumers that last year's cars, like the hem length of last year's dress, was out of date. Styling changes, not engineering excellence, determined the big sellers. The most To most American consumers, bigger seemed better, and bigger and fancier seemed best of all. These young 50s families didn't seem to have a problem paying for the new houses and the big cars. We were becoming an affluent nation. In the old days, most workers had toiled for long hours to enrich factory owners. Now, new union contracts were giving auto workers and others a share of their own productivity. They became some of the best customers for the cars and the appliances that were rolling out of the factories, and they set the standards for worker pay in other fields too. During that same time, oil was replacing coal as a major source of energy. In 1949, Americans used 5.8 million barrels of oil a day. By 1979, they were using 16.4 million barrels a day. Oil is much more efficient than coal. Getting it doesn't demand exhausting, killing work, and oil is very cheap. That changed a few decades later. Oil began driving the economy. It allowed Americans to get their big new cars and not worry about how much gas they guzzled. With a family in a car, chances are you'd want to take a trip. Hemmings Wilson, who was a house builder in Memphis, Tennessee, did just that. In 1951, he decided to take his family to Washington, D.C. to see the sights. You know how kids sometimes behave in the car, don't you? Well, the Wilsons' children were no different from anyone else's. Kemmons and his wife couldn't wait each night to get to a motel and relax. But most motels they found were mostly either disappointing or awful, and they charged an extra for each child in the room, even though the Wilsons' kids had brought their own sleeping bags. Kemmons Wilson decided he would build motels for families. The motels would all be similar, so people would know what they were getting. They would be clean and attractive, and kids could stay free. Popular singer Bing Crosby made a movie called Holiday Inn. Wilson thought it a great name for a motel. In 1956, when Congress passed a huge 76 billion federal highway program, Wilson's Holiday Inns were ready for all the traffic those new highways brought. Cars, suburbs, and TV watching were changing American habits, but some things hadn't changed. Most American families never went out to dinner. It was too expensive to eat out with the kids unless it was a very special occasion. Mothers, especially those suburban moms, were expected to stay home and cook meals. A lot of working people didn't go out either. They packed a sandwich in a bag and brought it to work. Two California brothers were going to change that. They were going to build a restaurant that was fast, clean, and very inexpensive. A place where you could feed the whole family without emptying your wallet. Dick and Mac Maurice McDonald had come to California in the Depressions, the 30s. In 1940, they built a drive-in restaurant. People stayed in their cars at the drive-in, and the waiters, called car hops, came out and served them. The restaurants appealed to families, especially during the years when lots of women went to work and didn't have time to cook. But the McDonald brothers had a passion for efficiency, and cars were lining up. People were waiting to get service. How could they speed things up? Well, the car hops would have to go. Then the McDonald's looked at their menu. There was too much to choose. That slowed things down. And it took time for the customers to put the ketchup and the relish on their hamburgers. So the McDonald's just decided to put pickles, mustard, ketchup, and onions right on the hamburgers. That really saved time. Instead of regular dishes and silver, they changed to paper plates and plastic forks. That was faster. But important of all, they organized the kitchen as a production line. It was the Henry Ford idea again, this time applied to hamburgers. Grill men cooked the burgers, milkshake men made the shakes, dressers wrapped the burgers, and the countermen took the orders. By the middle 50s, people were lined up to eat the burgers at The one McDonald's restaurant in San Bernardino, California. The brothers were rich and happy. They didn't need any more money than they had, but some people wanted to open McDonald's restaurants in other places. They wanted to buy franchises. That means they were willing to pay for the McDonald's name and expertise. The brothers didn't want to bother. One day Ray Kroc came by. He sold milkshake makers, and he wanted to see why the McDonald's were buying so many of them. He was astounded by what he saw. Long lines of people waiting to buy hamburgers. The place was spotlessly clean, the hamburgers were good, and they cost 15 cents. Dick and Mac McDonald were looking for someone to handle their franchising. Kroc was eager. With a few years, he bought the McDonald's name and the idea outright. Ray Kroc began opening McDonald's hamburger stores one after another. Soon they were everywhere. He wanted the hamburgers he sold in Des Plaines, Illinois, to be exactly like the hamburgers he sold in Willamar, Minnesota, or Kalamazoo, Michigan. He wanted every restaurant to be spotless and to maintain high standards. He made rules, lots of rules. McDonald's workers couldn't have beards and mustaches, or they couldn't chew gum. He made sure their fingernails were clean. He didn't like to hire women. He thought they would flirt with the customers. He worked very, very hard. His company grew to be huge, with a McDonald's almost every town and village, and his worth is hundreds of millions. His success was related to the new way of life in America. McDonald's were suburban restaurants. They took advantage of the locations on the new highways, and as more and more women began to get jobs, dinner at McDonald's or at one of the other fast food chains that followed became a regular thing. Ah, suburbia, happy suburbia. 1915 suburbia, or its image anyway, was part of Hollywood movie, part TV comedy series, and part slick magazine ad. All these media helped reinforce a sanitized image. There was a mom who was pretty, a dad who was handsome, two kids who were cute, and Rover who barked appealingly. A station wagon sat in the driveway, the garage held a lawnmower, bikes, dad's workbench, roller skates, and a family camping gear and a basketball hoop above the door. All the family earned about the same income. If they began earning more, they usually sold the house and moved to a fancier suburb. Everyone was white. Black people couldn't buy houses in Leviton or most of the other early suburbs. That would change later. Of course, separating the races, blacks in the cities, whites in the suburbs, didn't lead to harmony between them. Everyone was young. Grandma and grandpa were back in their small hometown, which was getting smaller as young couples moved to suburbia. Before communities had people of all ages to balance each other, in suburbia, children missed having grandparents nearby. Those picture pretty suburban families were expected to conform. Anyone who didn't fell out of place. Mothers weren't supposed to work. It spoiled the picture, but some women were bored. There wasn't a whole lot to do in the suburbs except drive the kids here and there, and dad got to hate the commuting and the highway traffic. Suburbia wasn't perfect, even though the TV shows and the magazines ad made you think it must be.